Rain hammered the windshield as I stood on the driveway with a suitcase already soaked through. My father's face was red and swollen with anger. The veins on his neck looked like thick ropes under his skin. "You're finished, Taylor," he shouted. "No daughter of mine defies me in my own boardroom." Before I could answer, he kicked the last box I had carried outside. The cardboard tore open, and my designer heels slid across the wet concrete like broken memories. For a moment I simply stared at them. Those shoes had walked into hundreds of project meetings. Tonight they lay in the rain like trash. My stomach dropped, but my hands didn't shake. I lifted my head and looked straight into his eyes. "I hope you remember this night," I said quietly, "when everything falls apart." His jaw tightened. Without another word he slammed the front door so hard the windows rattled. I stood there for several seconds, listening to the rain and the echo of the door. Then I bent down and picked up my shoes, placing them back inside the torn box. My whole life had disappeared in less than an hour. My job, my home, my future at Bennett Construction. But one thing had not disappeared. My will to fight. I placed the suitcase in my car, wiped the rain from my eyes, and drove away before the tears could begin. What I didn't know was that somewhere across town, the family lawyer had already picked up his phone and started dialing my number. I pulled into my best friend Maya's apartment complex at 2 in the morning. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but my clothes were still damp and my mascara had turned into dark streaks on my cheeks. My hands shook as I knocked on her door. She opened it wearing pajamas and messy hair. The moment she saw my face, she didn't ask a single question. She just pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm here," she whispered. The warmth of her apartment hit me as we stepped inside. I sat on her couch with a mug of tea in my hands, but I couldn't drink it. My mind kept replaying the moment in the boardroom earlier that night. My father had slid the contract across the huge mahogany table. Kyle, my younger brother, sat beside him with a small smug smile. "Sign it," my father had said, tapping the paper, "or you're out." The document had transferred my authority in the company to Kyle. I had stared at it for a long moment, then calmly slid it back toward him. "No," I had said. Now that one word had cost me everything. "I have $217 left," I whispered to Maya. "And nowhere to go." She squeezed my shoulder. "You're not alone tonight." I forced a smile. But deep inside, my mind had already started planning my next move. Morning sunlight slipped through the blinds and landed on the coffee table covered with printed resumes. Every page still carried the same line near the top. Senior Project Manager, Bennett Construction. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I took a black marker and slowly crossed them out. Without the company, I was suddenly just another unemployed professional with a complicated last name. I tried calling a former client who had once praised my work. My hope lasted exactly 10 seconds. His voice turned cold. "Taylor, your father told us you were fired for misconduct." The line went quiet before he hung up. Blacklisted. The word felt heavy in my chest. I spent the rest of the day in Maya's guest room editing my online profiles and writing a careful post saying I was seeking new opportunities. Each notification made my heart jump. Late that afternoon my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something in my gut told me not to. I answered slowly. "Hello." A calm voice replied. "Miss Bennett? My name is Richard Ellison. I'm the attorney who handled your late mother's estate." My pulse instantly quickened. "I've been trying to reach you since yesterday." I sat up straighter, gripping the phone. My mother had passed away 8 years earlier, and hearing someone mention her name always pulled something deep inside my chest. "Yes, Mr. Ellison," I said carefully. "What is this about?" His voice remained calm and professional. "Your father contacted me yesterday to schedule a meeting about a corporate contract. However, there is something in your mother's trust agreement that activates if he attempts to force your signature." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" "Your mother created an irrevocable trust before her passing. According to the document, You own 40% of Bennett Construction. Those shares cannot be transferred without your approval. The room seemed to tilt. 40%, I whispered. Yes, he replied. And your father cannot legally remove you from the company without violating the trust. I pressed my free hand against my forehead. Everything suddenly made sense. My father had needed my signature because he couldn't take control without it. He doesn't know you called me, I asked quietly. No, Ellison said. I believed you should hear this information first. For the first time since the driveway confrontation, a small smile formed on my face. Thank you, Mr. Ellison, I said. Please keep this conversation between us for now. He agreed. After the call ended, I sat there in silence. My father thought he had thrown me away. But my mother had left me something he could never take. 2 days later, I checked into a cheap extended-stay hotel on the edge of the city. The carpet smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals, and the furniture looked older than most of my childhood memories. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet. And quiet was exactly what I needed. Every night I studied the trust documents Mr. Ellison had emailed me. I read them slowly, highlighting important lines and writing notes in the margins. My mother had been smarter than anyone gave her credit for. Buried inside the paperwork were protections that prevented my father from making major decisions without shareholder approval. My 40% meant I had more power than he realized. Meanwhile, industry rumors began floating through professional networks. Bennett Construction had just lost the Riverfront Mall project bid. The message circulating among developers was simple. Kyle had promised impossible deadlines again. I leaned back on the hotel bed and opened a cheap bottle of wine from the corner store. Keep digging your hole, Dad, I murmured to the empty room. I wasn't ready to reveal my hand yet. Instead, I kept studying, planning, and waiting. Because the best revenge wasn't loud. The best revenge was patient. My first freelance job appeared in an unexpected way. A small developer named Marcus Hale sent me a short message through LinkedIn. His company had lost several bids to Bennett Construction over the years, and he clearly enjoyed the idea of working with someone my father had pushed out. Can you redesign a warehouse conversion plan? He asked. Tight timeline. I accepted immediately and offered a price 10% lower than my usual rate. For 4 days I barely slept. I worked from the tiny desk in the hotel room, sketching blueprints and adjusting structural layouts until my eyes burned. When I finally delivered the finished files, Marcus called within minutes. Taylor, he said, sounding stunned, you just saved us $180,000. The payment arrived the next morning. It wasn't a fortune, but it was proof that my skills still had value outside my father's shadow. I transferred part of the money to Maya as a thank you for letting me stay with her earlier. Then I bought one new outfit for upcoming meetings. Standing in front of the mirror, I practiced a calm smile. One day I would walk back into that boardroom again. And when that day came, my father would realize the biggest mistake of his career was throwing me out. A voicemail from Kyle arrived close to midnight a week later. Taylor, his voice said casually, Dad wants to resolve things quietly. If you come sign the paperwork now, we can arrange a small severance package. I listened twice before deleting the message. The next call I made was to Mr. Ellison. Tell my father the trust is active, I said calmly, and inform him that I will not be signing anything. The silence on the other end lasted a few seconds before Ellison replied, Understood. The next morning Financial News reported that Bennett Construction stock had dropped 8% after rumors of internal disputes reached investors. I stared at the headline while sipping cheap hotel coffee. My father still believed I had no leverage. But every hour he delayed facing reality was quietly costing him money. A month later my life changed again. A large rival firm offered me a full-time position after hearing about my work on Marcus Hale's project. The hiring manager shook my hand during the interview and said, We know exactly what happened at Bennett. Their loss. The salary they offered was double what I had earned before. I accepted without hesitation. That same afternoon, an anonymous email appeared in my inbox from an old colleague. Your dad just fired 3 senior engineers. Morale is terrible. I forwarded the message to Ellison with one simple line. Keep watching. Board meeting season arrived soon after. Because of my shares, I had the legal right to attend as a shareholder. When I walked into the conference room wearing my new suit, the sound of my heels clicking across the floor seemed louder than usual. My father froze mid-sentence. Kyle nearly spilled his coffee. I took a seat at the far end of the table without saying a word. The meeting agenda included something interesting. Leadership restructuring. After 20 minutes of discussion, I finally raised my hand. The room went completely silent. Even before I spoke, they knew something had changed. I voted against every proposal my father presented that day. Legally. Without raising my voice once. The board members shifted in their chairs as they realized my 40% stake meant every major decision now required my approval. My father slammed his fist on the table. "This is still my company," he shouted. I quietly slid the trust document across the table. No one spoke for several seconds. The meeting ended in chaos. Outside the building, Kyle caught up with me in the hallway. "You're destroying everything," he snapped. I met his eyes. "No," I replied. "Your father already did that." The Riverfront Mall project was supposed to be Bennett Construction's biggest contract in years. When I first heard about it months earlier, I had already warned my father that the timeline Kyle promised was impossible. Of course, he never listened. 3 weeks after the board meeting disaster, my phone rang during lunch at my new office. The caller ID showed a developer I recognized from the Riverfront project. "Taylor," the man said, sounding exhausted. "We're in trouble. Kyle's team missed 2 permit deadlines, and half the subcontractors have already walked off the site." I leaned back in my chair slowly. "What do you want from me?" "Yes. We want you to consult." Quietly. That evening I met him at a small cafe across town. I reviewed their updated plans and immediately saw the problem. Kyle had overpromised again, ignoring 3 key engineering limitations. Within 2 hours I had redesigned the schedule and adjusted the structural layout. The developer stared at the new plan. "You just saved us $400,000, he said quietly. Word traveled faster than I expected. 2 weeks later my new firm promoted me to vice president. Meanwhile, my father's company kept slipping further behind on the very project he had once bragged about winning. One morning at 7 o'clock my phone buzzed beside the bed. It was Mr. Ellison. His voice sounded more serious than usual. "Taylor, your father has scheduled an emergency shareholder vote this afternoon." I sat up immediately. "For what?" "He plans to dilute your shares by issuing new stock to outside investors." I almost laughed. My father had always believed he could bend the rules if he pushed hard enough. "Can he do that?" "Yes." "Not without violating the trust agreement," Ellison replied. "But he's trying anyway." By noon I was standing outside the Bennett Construction headquarters again, this time with my own attorney beside me. When I entered the boardroom, several directors looked nervous. My father's expression was tight with anger. "We're voting today," he announced quickly. The motion failed the moment I raised my hand. My 40% blocked the proposal completely. The room filled with whispers. My father's hands trembled slightly as he signed the meeting minutes. I stood up and walked out without saying goodbye. For the first time in my life, I had seen fear in his eyes. Business news spreads quickly in the construction world. Within a month, 3 major clients contacted my new firm asking if I would personally oversee their upcoming projects. I never called them first. They came to me. Every conversation sounded similar. "We heard things aren't stable at Bennett anymore." I kept my responses polite and professional. My new company offered better timelines, stronger engineering teams, and clear communication. That was enough. By the end of the quarter, Bennett Construction's revenue had dropped 27%. An old colleague sent me a video from one of their construction sites. Kyle stood in the middle of the frame shouting at workers who refused to follow his unrealistic schedule. The clip circulated through the company's internal chat before someone deleted it. I watched it once and then closed the file. My revenge wasn't about shouting or embarrassing anyone. It was about numbers, decisions, and consequences. And the numbers were starting to tell a very clear story. A few weeks later, my father began calling my new office. The first message sounded angry. The second sounded desperate. By the third call, he was asking for a family discussion. I instructed my assistant to politely decline every request. One evening after work, I drove past the house where I had grown up. The large front lawn looked exactly the same, but something about it felt different. Near the driveway, I spotted the faded oil stain from the night. He had thrown my suitcase into the rain. I slowed the car for a moment but didn't stop. Instead, I kept driving toward my new apartment overlooking the river. The view from the balcony reminded me that life had moved forward. The girl who once depended on her father's approval was gone. Another surprise arrived 2 months later. Mr. Ellison called again, this time sounding almost shocked. Within days, panic spread through Bennett headquarters. Without access to new loans, several ongoing projects suddenly lacked funding. My father had always believed he controlled every part of the company. Now he was learning what it felt like when someone else held the brakes. Kyle appeared at my new office one afternoon without an appointment. His hair looked messy, and dark circles hung under his eyes. "Taylor, we need to talk," he said the moment he stepped inside. I gestured toward the chair across from my desk. "Sit down." He didn't sit. "Dad's losing everything," he said. "The bank is breathing down his neck, and the board is furious. You have to fix this." I studied him for a moment before pouring 2 cups of coffee from the machine behind me. I slid one across the desk. "The only person who can fix it," I said calmly, "is your father." Kyle's jaw tightened. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "No," I replied honestly. "I'm watching the consequences of bad leadership." He left my office without touching the coffee. Later that evening, I checked the market report. Bennett Construction's stock had dropped again. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The annual financial report arrived near the end of the year. Bennett Construction posted its first major loss in more than 2 decades. According to several former co-workers who now worked for me, my father held a tense all-hands meeting at headquarters. He blamed falling revenue on disloyal employees and unfair competition. Half the staff reportedly glanced toward the empty chair where I once sat during leadership meetings. One of my former engineers called later that night asking if my firm had any openings. "We do," I told her. By the end of the week, she had joined my team with a higher salary and better benefits. Sometimes the quietest victories were the most satisfying. Just when it seemed like the situation couldn't become more complicated, Mr. Ellison called with another discovery. His tone carried a rare urgency. "Taylor, your father attempted to sell the entire company last week." I sat up straight in my office chair. "Without board approval?" "Yes," Ellison said. "And the documents included a forged signature under your name." For a moment I stared at the city skyline outside my window. Legally, the evidence could destroy him in court. Instead, I walked into the next board meeting and placed the papers on the table in front of everyone. "If this happens again," I said quietly, "I will take legal action." My father looked 10 years older within seconds. The potential buyer withdrew immediately after learning the truth about the forged approvals. Word spread through the industry faster than I expected. Within weeks, several companies contacted my firm directly, asking for consultations on projects that had once belonged to Bennett Construction. Ironically, some of the engineers now working on those projects were former Bennett employees who had followed me after leaving my father's company. One after another, they shared similar stories about frustration and poor leadership. Each time I listened carefully and then focused on building stronger teams. Slowly, quietly, the balance of power continued shifting. Late one evening, I received a message from Kyle. His words were shorter this time. "Dad had a health scare. Stress-related. The company is barely holding together. Please help us." I read the text twice before setting my phone on the table. Minutes later, I typed a single reply. The company you both destroyed isn't my responsibility anymore. Then I silenced my phone and left for a client dinner across town. That night our firm finalized a $12 million development contract overlooking the river. While everyone celebrated the new deal, I stood near the window for a moment, looking out at the city lights. The storm that had begun in a rain-soaked driveway months earlier had completely changed my life. And it wasn't finished yet. The message from Kyle stayed on my phone long after I left the office that evening. Dad had a health scare. Stress-related. The company is barely holding together. Please help us. For a moment I simply stared at the words. Months earlier I might have rushed to the hospital without thinking. But that version of me had disappeared the night my suitcase hit the wet driveway. I typed a short reply. The company you both destroyed isn't my responsibility anymore. Then I switched my phone to silent and headed to a client dinner across the city. My team had just finished negotiating a $12 million waterfront development. The restaurant windows overlooked the river, and the city lights reflected off the water like broken glass. Everyone around the table was laughing and celebrating, but part of my mind drifted back to the chaos still unfolding at Bennett Construction. Reports had already begun circulating that the company's main bank was questioning several financial records. Without new credit lines, projects were stalling and suppliers were demanding faster payments. During dessert my phone vibrated once more before going quiet again. I didn't check it. Instead I raised my glass with the rest of the team and toasted the success of our new project. For the first time in years, my future no longer depended on my father's decisions. 2 weeks later Mr. Ellison called with news that caught even him by surprise. The Internal Revenue Service has opened a preliminary review into Bennett Construction, he said carefully. I leaned back in my chair. What triggered it? Several questionable deductions tied to family expenses, Ellison explained. Some of them were filed while you were still listed as an executive. My stomach tightened slightly. So my name is on those documents? Yes, he replied. But the records show the approvals came from your father's office. An investigation like that could drag on for months and damage the company even further. Technically, I could have stepped aside and watched the process unfold. Instead, I asked Ellison to send me every file connected to the issue. After reviewing the documents carefully, I made a decision that surprised even me. I paid the outstanding tax balance using dividends from my shareholder account. But I attached one condition. My father had to sign an agreement transferring all day-to-day operational control of the company to the board. Ellison delivered the offer personally. According to him, my father signed the document with shaking hands and tears in his eyes. I felt no triumph when I heard the news. Only quiet closure. The board meeting that followed felt strangely calm compared to the chaos of earlier months. One by one the directors reviewed the updated leadership proposal. With my father stepping down from daily operations, the company needed someone who understood both the business and the current financial crisis. When the chairman finally spoke, every person in the room turned toward me. The board votes to appoint Taylor Bennett as interim chief executive officer during the restructuring period, he announced. The motion passed unanimously. My father sat quietly at the end of the table. His new title was Founder Emeritus, which sounded impressive but carried no real authority. Kyle's situation was simpler. The board voted to terminate his position with 3 months of severance pay. He stood up quickly, his chair scraping loudly across the floor, and walked out without saying a word. My father remained seated while the rest of the room slowly emptied. As he gathered a few papers into a small briefcase, he never once looked in my direction. For the first time in decades, Bennett Construction was no longer under his control. My first official day as CEO began in the same boardroom where my father had tried to force me to sign that contract months earlier. The mahogany table looked exactly the same, polished and heavy, but the atmosphere felt completely different. I ran my hand lightly across the surface before sitting down at the head of the table. The restructuring plan moved quickly. Several projects were reassigned, new financial controls were installed, and the engineering teams.
that had nearly fallen apart began working together again. Within 3 months, the company returned to profitability. The first quarterly report showed steady revenue growth and renewed investor confidence. To thank the employees who had endured the chaos, I approved a company-wide bonus using part of the recovered profits. When the announcement went out, my inbox filled with messages from workers across every department. Many of them simply said the same thing. Thank you for believing in us. I realized then that leadership wasn't about control or fear. It was about trust. Late one evening after work, I drove past the old family house one last time. The property looked quieter than I remembered. A large for sale sign stood near the edge of the driveway. Neighbors had told me my father recently moved into a small downtown condominium after selling most of his personal assets to cover company debts from the previous year. Kyle had taken a job with another construction firm, starting again as a junior site supervisor. I slowed the car as I passed the driveway where my suitcase had once landed in the rain. The stain from that night had finally faded. I didn't stop the car. Instead, I continued driving toward the new apartment overlooking the river. The city skyline glowed softly against the dark sky, and the water below reflected the lights like a calm mirror. For the first time in a long while, my past felt smaller than my future. 6 months later, I stood on the rooftop terrace of Bennett Construction's new headquarters building. The evening air was cool, and the city lights stretched across the horizon below me. The company had recovered faster than anyone expected. Several new contracts were already underway, and the stock price had climbed higher than it had been in years. But the greatest change wasn't the financial success. It was the culture inside the company. Engineers who once feared speaking up now shared ideas freely. Project managers collaborated instead of competing. The entire organization felt lighter, stronger, and more united. My father never contacted me again after signing the control agreement. At first, I wondered if that silence would bother me. Instead, it became a kind of peace. I leaned against the railing and looked out over the glowing skyline. The memory of that rainy driveway still existed, but it no longer carried pain. It had simply been the beginning of a different path. Sometimes people try to shrink you so they can feel powerful. When that happens, the strongest response isn't anger. It's walking away, building something better, and knowing your worth. That night on the rooftop, watching the city below, I finally understood something simple and powerful. Justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives quietly and stays forever.